We found this laying there. No blood. No Dallas. Nothing.
Hello and welcome to The Visualist, a podcast journey through the many works of Ridley Scott. I'm your co-host Gareth Green, and I'm joined as always by writer-director MK Rhodes as my co-pilot in this journey through the Governor's lengthy filmography. And you join us for the second part of our double bill, in which we'll be discussing how and why Scott's 1979 masterpiece, Alien, changed the landscape of sci-fi and horror cinema. But before we take another bite out of this classic, it's time to roll the trailer.
I've never seen anything like it.
Let's get out of here.
We've got this far, we must go on. We have to go on.
Okay, MK, so I just want to start this conversation for our second episode by asking, what is it that keeps driving audiences back to Alien? We've spoken about ourselves and how, what the things are that pull us back to the series. But really, when we look at horror and the horror landscape, how that keeps shifting depending on social attitudes and things like that, why is it that Alien has outlasted these shifts in the perception of what horror should be and is? Why do people keep on coming back to this film and this series?
Well, with this film especially, I think it's, I don't think general audiences are necessarily attracted to the great artistic successes of it in terms of like its production design or, the look of it, the cinematography, all of which are like first class, peerless, almost never equaled by anything else. I think really they keep coming back because it had such an impact in terms of, genre, because it is really scary. I've seen it, God, how many times have I seen it in the theater? At least 7 or 8 times in the cinema. Yeah. Every time there is still a visceral reaction in the audience to many of the scenes in the film. And I mean, to be perfectly honest, you do not get that with modern horror films, really. You unfortunately don't get that with Ridley Scott's later horror films either. I don't think anyone who saw Hannibal was like terrified by Hannibal. It's certainly repulsive and grotesque. And I like that film. I think it's really entertaining trash. But when I saw Prometheus, people were laughing at it. They were not screaming. I don't know. There's just something. Everyone was firing on all cylinders with Alien to the point that it is. Ridley Scott describes it as a marathon of tension, and that's exactly what it is. Interestingly enough, the most infamous scenes in it that are supposed to be the most scary, like the chestburster scene, are not the ones that really like shake an audience still. The two scenes that I've seen it again almost 10 times in the theater, and every single time the two scenes that really knock the audience out, that actually like make people scream, like I've heard screams in the audience, are the biggest one is when Dallas gets killed. That whole sequence is a masterpiece of tension building. The way Terry Rawlings cross-cuts the various different parties with Tom Skerritt crawling around through the vents, the way, and this is another instance where Terry Rawlings was absolutely correct to keep his temp score using Goldsmith's Freud instead of the music Goldsmith actually composed for that scene. Because if you listen to you can put on the alternate score track on the Blu-ray or the DVD. If you listen to the Shaft, the actual cue composed for that scene by Jerry, it doesn't fit. It doesn't have the same. It doesn't have the same building tension. It's not scary. It's too, as David Giler kind of slagged off the score, it's too lush.
Yeah.
The Freud cue that Terry Rawlings replaced it with is very tense. It's very stripped down. It's very low key. And it's very, very effective.
It made me think, is there a scene as tense as that in Freud? to warrant that music, what type of film is Freud?
I don't know. I have not seen Freud. I should see Freud. I've heard the music from it enough times. I have the soundtrack too, because it's, great music. But that scene always kills, and I've never seen in any other movie, at least in a theatrical context, where people were more frightened than they were during that scene in the vents. And then, of course, there is the scene where Yaphet Kotto smacks Ash Ian Holmes' head off.
Yeah.
That scene always, especially, that's where they did keep Jerry Goldsmith's score, and it does work. It does work really well. Mm-hmm. And it's just such a startling effect. It doesn't have quite as much impact as I think it did back in 1979 when, an usher fainted when that happened.
There's a great story on the Blu-ray making of The Beast Within, in which Tom Skerritt retells a story that he had heard about the film, about one of the cinemas that was showing the film, that what the cinema owner was saying, that Alien made a complete mess of their toilets. People were always running into the toilets to throw up during the chestburster scene. He said, and it just made a complete mess of the place. And he said, but we fixed that. And he said, how did you fix it? And he said, well, we took out the scene. And that's truly a great story. I wonder how that film plays without the scene of the chestburster.
I imagine Ridley was not too happy with that.
I imagine not.
There's nothing else like it, despite I don't know how many rip-offs and clones of Alien there are. Mm. And, there are people who, at the time, and, still now to be, contrarian, try and argue, well, Alien itself is just a rip-off. No, it's not a rip-off. It's taking certain elements that were already floating around out there and then, actually making them good.
Yeah.
Which, there's no, Planet of the Vampires rip-offs. There's no, all the things that went into inspiring Alien. There was no descendants of them. I guess that leads me into discussing David Cronenberg, who bears a very pronounced grudge against the first Alien movie. And
really?
Yes. He really, really hated it when it came out because he thought Dan O'Bannon plagiarized him. He thought Alien plagiarized his movie Shivers, which, if you watch them, is obviously not the case.
Yeah.
Especially since you can directly pull where Dan O'Bannon took those things from way before David Cronenberg, who thinks he knows much more about horror than he apparently does. David Cronenberg, shortly after it was released, opined that Alien has no metaphysics, no philosophy. The creature winds up as a man in a crocodile suit who chases a bunch of people around a room. I think that my own films do a lot more in touching a deep-seated nerve, more than the simple reaction that you don't want a crocodile to eat you. Alien was just a $300,000 B movie with a $10 million budget. I guess a horror film only has metaphysics, quote unquote, when it explicitly spells its subtext out with capital T themes and flat-looking shots where the only thing interesting is the makeup effects. Because David Cronenberg is no visual stylist.
That's definitely plays into that. As I say, I've always taken a sort of John Carpenter approach to David Cronenberg, and that, he's a bit pretentious. I like his films, but he's a bit pretentious.
He's writing novels now. Maybe, I'm sure this is going to piss a lot of people off listening, because I know people really love Cronenberg, but I find his movies kind of difficult to sit through because they're so boring looking, which is really saying something when there's a giant beetle with an anus for a mouth on its back. Yeah. Some of them, but they're
or
so...
James Woods reaching into his stomach vagina to pick out a gun.
Exactly. But they're so flat looking. They're so flatly lit. They're so flatly shot. They're so flatly composed in terms of their imagery. And I think it's pretty funny that David Cronenberg is so, I guess, non-visually oriented that he completely missed the roar of Alien's sexual imagery. Which is just constant and in your face and not subtle at all. There's the Alien itself, which someone, a writer I respect a lot, she called it a semen dripping cock beast. I mean, there's Ian Holmes he's basically a cum-spewing android, like rolling up a magazine to shove down Sigourney Weaver's throat.
And then completely reaching climax and spewing everywhere.
Exactly. There's the gargantuan sets themselves are huge erogenous zones. I mean, the opening of the derelict spacecraft it's enormous gaping vaginas. It's not subtle. They are huge vaginas. They've got labia and everything. The space jockey's chair is a giant fossilized priapism. And then the hatches, those hatches that Tom Skerritt crawls through in the film's tensest, scariest scenes, they're grimy sphincters. It's not subtle. None of this is subtle. And in fact, the egg itself is the only thing that they had to pull back on, because Giger originally designed it and built it to have a vagina opening on the top. Yeah. And that's the only thing Ridley Scott, objected to. And he says,
I think it looks too far.
Yeah. Says I think it looks fucking obscene, apparently. And Gordon Carroll was there when Ridley objected to the vagina egg as being too obscene. And let me find the actual quote. So Giger shows Ridley Scott the egg with the vagina opening, and Ridley is very dismayed and says, "I think it's fucking obscene. It looks like some great fanny." Which, for American listeners, we consider fanny to be the ass, but fanny in the UK has a very different connotation.
It certainly does. I imagine that incites laughs on both sides of the Atlantic, really.
Well, then Gordon Carroll turns and says, "Ridley, you have an alien running around with a 3-foot penis on its head. You have a giant spaceship with massive 15-foot vaginas, and you think the egg is obscene."
And even, like, the way that the chestburster is presented, like, that's always been a scene to me that screams sexuality, because not only do we have, like,
it's a
male...
penis. It's literally just a penis.
Exactly. It's a man giving birth, and he gives birth to a dick. It like rises out of his chest like an erect dick. I'm drawn to this as well, that I love that Yaphet Kotto, Parker, the most masculine character on the ship, is the first one to recognize it as a threat, because he's like, I am the alpha here, and he's the first one to pick up a fork as if that thing needs to die. It's like, I love those little quirks as well, because although I don't think that all of these things are thought about at the time, I think that they come to take on meaning when you have all of these other aspects of Alien providing this thematic depth that suddenly that means more. Like the idea of the alpha male of the pack being threatened instantly by the image of the biggest dick in the room rising out of Kane's chest. I love all that. And of course it's Ash. It's Ash to jump in the way, the dickless wonder, to stop him from harming the chestburster in any way, shape or form. Alien wears its themes on its chest, no pun intended. I think because of some of the things that it presents, it also, as I mentioned, has a depth that clearly David Cronenberg is not giving it credit for.
Well, the interesting thing is, I would think that, because we have to discuss this in our tourist context, because this is our tourist series of podcasting, but Ridley Scott would probably agree with David Cronenberg.
Yeah.
Ridley Scott... when he made this, and when he made Blade Runner too, interestingly enough, his mantra was, I don't want it to be pretentious and I don't want it to be an esoteric film. He always uses that word esoteric to describe the kind of films he does not want to make. Ridley Scott very much considers himself a populist filmmaker. He wants to reach wide audiences. He doesn't consider himself an art house director at all.
Yeah.
And if you bring it up in an interview or anything about Alien, he shuts it down. He does not want to talk about meanings or themes with Alien. To him, Alien is a horror movie first, and everything else is just reading into it. He had some very unkind things to say about Alien 3, actually, based on that. After the release of Alien 3, Ridley Scott had this to say: I hated it. The Alien movies are haunted house rides designed to scare the shit out of audiences, nothing more, nothing less. All that intellectual feminist nonsense was a waste of time, in my view.
Oh, my word.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's almost something Lynchian about that. In that, I mean, David Lynch is someone whose work has always got something going on behind the surface. But I feel like his refusal to provide any explanation for the images that he provides is endearing, and it means that there's greater depth that people find in his work. In a way, Ridley Scott's playing into that, because I think that even if you're a filmmaker that says, my work contains no meaning, I feel like contextually there's always going to be meaning within the work, regardless of whether you want it to have some or not.
Oh, no, it absolutely does. And that's mainly because of everyone else who worked on it, put all that in there. But also because despite his, all of his adamancy to the contrary, like Ridley Scott does put a lot in there himself without, I guess, consciously realizing it, because it's interesting when you watch his interviews, he doesn't think about it from that particular way. He's one of those filmmakers who says, oh, my work is not political, but then he puts politics into it in a way that he's not consciously realizing that's what he's doing, but that's what he's doing. For example, like the sexuality of the characters, that's something that ended up being cut. There are a lot of deleted scenes from this film. Ridley Scott does not care about, themes or whatever. He just cares about thoroughly realizing a world. Yeah. And he's the really the original world master of world building of cinema. No one had really built worlds before him. Yeah. I guess you could say maybe George Lucas with Star Wars, but Star Wars is not it's not a convincing evocation of a world. It's a fantasy movie.
Yes, and I feel like in terms of the world that Star Wars presents, although I would probably lose a lot of listeners for saying this, I feel like it's a very limited world as well in terms of what it presents, because we've certainly found that in the sequels since that there's only so much you can do and so much you can play with within this universe, whereas Ridley Scott has provided not just one world that has proved that it can last throughout time so far, but he's presented multiple worlds as well, like fully realized worlds. So I feel like there's certainly, on this level, there's not a rival, in my opinion, to Ridley Scott for his world building.
No, definitely not. He's so thorough and meticulous about... a lot of that also comes from Ron Cobb's production design, which is so intensely detailed. Every facet of the ship looks like it works. There's like pages of background information about what all the symbols he designed means. Like this really is a functioning industrial world of the future presented on screen. But Ridley, one of the reasons it's endured, aside from just the brilliant cast, is that they're playing people who seem very convincingly real, especially because they're not especially likable. But part of that is like Ridley Scott's sitting there thinking, okay, well, what is life going to be like for people in the year 2100 something or whatever, And this is from all the way back in 1979. One of his thoughts was like, okay, well, in the future, everyone will basically be bisexual, or there will be no like taboos against sexuality. So there's like little hints dropped throughout the movie, and especially in the deleted scenes. Basically, the crew all sleep with each other if they want to. Yeah. Ripley, like, very tenderly sort of calms down Lambert after one of their big fights by, like, stroking her cheek and being gentle with her, and Ridley Scott sort of insinuating that, maybe they've slept with each other. And then she asks her, have you ever slept with Ash? And she's like, no, I didn't think he was particularly interested, anything. Yeah. I can see why that scene was cut, because it's one of those bulky things where it just like the film has a flow. The theatrical cut of the film flows beautifully. That sort of thing, just it's not necessary to the story. It
stands out as too much of a foreshadowing in a film in which everything feels authentic. Everything feels like it's not playing to the conventions in terms of setup. And I mean, it does have many setups and payoffs, but not in the way it, as we talked about on the last episode, like in terms of the exposition that's provided. Like somebody will say a line that comes into play later on and about something else where there's obvious setups. That feels like an obvious play into, well, there's something off about Ash. Whereas I like the gradual tension between Ripley and Ash coming to an obvious head without there being this... because there is a sexual tension there as well, without there being something explicitly stated as well. This whole idea of him being this android who lacks the ability to essentially have sex in a world in which everybody's doing it. And I love that, as well as, like you say, about Ridley Scott's politics in terms of how it bleeds through. That is a quite progressive way to look at the future as well. And I like the idea of a future in which there's a more of an accepting fluidity to sexuality and that type of thing. In a way, Ash feels very much, because he doesn't have that, he's an outsider to that as well. I like the way it plays into him being like, there's something off there sexually with him and the rest of the crew. That's me again, probably looking into it, pulling from the conversations that Ridley Scott's had in the director's commentary, because for somebody that doesn't want to add themes to his story, he's like, oh, well, why is Ash acting this way? Well, he doesn't have a dick. Like, those are themes. Those are things to, to really build into. It may be something that he's just thought of like, well, that's the obvious explanation. It's like, yeah, but it adds so much more to the story in terms of what you can pull out of it, in terms of what Ash represents in this world. For me, always, it makes sense for the character who lacks any functioning genitalia whatsoever to find something to admire about the alien, about this creature that essentially disregards gender completely. In its eyes, all it sees are hosts. Everybody is essentially an incubator for the alien host, essentially, to create more aliens. We as people, our individualities, the dressing that we have around our genders and that type of thing, it doesn't matter. And that's why, like, I think Ash finds that there's something to marvel. And I like that the part of the film where he feels most that is flirtatious with Ripley is when he's describing the alien. He's like describing it with very much like there's more than admiration at work here.
Envy.
And I love what that represents for that character.
There's a science fiction author called James Tiptree Jr. who was actually a woman named Alice Sheldon, who for a decade, nobody knew she was a woman. They all thought she was just this incredibly perceptive man who really, understood, or at least really empathized with, what it meant to be a woman. He wrote really, really disturbing, really harrowing science fiction stories that ventured into horror. And one of my favorites, and which is sort of a clear antecedent to Alien, even though I don't necessarily know if anyone involved with it read it, certainly not Ridley Scott. There's a 1975 novella called A Momentary Taste of Being. And it's about, in the future, Earth is completely overpopulated, so Earth is like sending out scout ships to various potentially habitable planets to try and find a new Earth to, shift sections of the population to. And one of these scout ships does find a planet that is perfectly habitable to human life without even terraforming or anything. And there doesn't seem to be anything alive on the planet except these gigantic, these large oval growths or something. Long story short, those sort of ovoids turn out to be ovum, and we are the sperm. The entire history of life on Earth was literally just to eventually trigger this mass exodus of sperm from this ball sack of a planet and fertilize the ovum on this other planet. Our entire purpose, the entire 3 billion year history of life on the planet Earth has just been part of this cosmic life cycle of something far beyond what we can ever understand. And all we are is literally sperm. And it shifts into horror when, and this was Tiptree's thing, is her terror was of biological determinism, of our instincts and how they undermine us, because at bottom we're still just dumb animals who
we are primates wearing suits.
Yeah, we rationalize our baser impulses, but they're still there, and we're still slaves to them. When people get near these ovum, they have an irresistible urge to just go and merge with it and divulge everything within themselves to it.
Oh wow, that hits me in the same way that famous Junji Ito comic hit me as well.
Yeah, it's a clear forerunner to that. The Enigma of Arigama Fault, I think it's called.
Yes, that's the one.
It's just an irresistible drive to go to these things because that's what your entire point is. That's all you're made for. Is it your sperm for this? The main character manages to resist this impulse to go towards them and locks himself in part of the ship. He's debating whether to hit the button that sends a signal back to Earth to tell people to come, and it ends with him hitting the button to bring humanity to this planet.
Holy shit, I need to read this. This is fucking terrifying. I like things that reduce us to that level, that make us aware of our place within the universe in terms of And I think Alien plays into that as well. Like, I love that the way that Alien views humanity. We, despite all of our individualities, like, and the way that we dress ourselves, and because we put so much effort into constructing ourselves and things that matter as well, like in terms of how we identify, I think those things fundamentally make us who we are. And Alien is a film that says, in the face of the universe, nothing about who you are matters. When it comes to it, we are all just hosts to whatever mean things are out there. And that is a horrifying prospect about humanity and its place in the entire cosmos. That gets to me as well. That makes me feel that sense of existential dread that great works do. And it's not just about the horror of...
That's one of the words I don't like when people usually apply it to like horror films. Existential. I think it's thrown around a lot in a way that doesn't really apply. But with Alien, it does absolutely apply. And that's also part of the fault, the quote-unquote fault of Ridley Scott, is because he strips it back so much. He's so focused on not putting anything pretentious into it that it takes on that existential quality. The only other sort of horror film in its wake that I would sort of compare it to in that way is The Hitcher from 1986, which is a terrifying movie. I think that's probably the scariest movie of the 80s. It's definitely the scariest movie in the slasher genre. You could argue that Alien is a slasher, but there's already enough genre arguments about Alien going on right now. The Hitcher is a perfect example of like an existential horror movie.
Definitely.
That is a terrifying film. And it even has a Ridley Scott connection with Rutger Hauer.
And with Rutger Hauer as well, it always strikes me. I mean, he is a great actor that really never got his due in the way that he should have. I mean, the fact that I believe that he went on to do films like Seconds Out. Is that what it's called? Seconds Out? The UK-based one?
Oh, no.
Split Second.
Yeah, Split Second. That's a fun movie.
Split Second.
He's really fun in that movie, but it's not a great movie, but it's very fun.
Yes, no, he's great, but I feel like when you look at his roles in The Hitcher and Blade Runner, and you feel the warmth of Roy Batty and just the sheer nothingness void that is The Hitcher in the Hitcher film, like the terrifying void that he is. He's in a way, as you say, it is like I know I've mentioned this word already as well, but it is truly an existential threat.
Yeah, and there's a sexual terror in The Hitcher too that I think puts it firmly in line with Alien as well, because the Rutger Hauer in The Hitcher, he's not just menacing with the threat of violence. He's menacing sexually. He flirts. He doesn't just flirt. He like he's full on putting his hands all over that boy. There are times where you think he's going to kiss him. When the boy spits in his face, he like rubs it into his skin. In fact, like that's all there. It's not subtle, and that's Roger Ebert's review of that movie is very interesting. He gave it 0 stars for a really stupid reason, which was that this film is masquerading as a horror movie, but it's really on the under level. It's about something else. I'm like, yeah, that's the point, Roger. He's got a good few reviews that strike me that way, where it's suddenly like, you've just hit the nail on the head without knowing it. Exactly. That's very much there in Alien. In fact, I hadn't really considered that before, but Alien and The Hitcher are sort of very much simpatico films, really. Yeah. They're about an implacable threat. In Rutger Hauer in The Hitcher, he doesn't even seem human. There's something so almost supernatural about him. He's more like a monster or a demon almost than a human being. Yeah. He's like seemingly indestructible. He appears wherever. He fully dies in that film, but I don't think that would stop him. Like, the end of that film is not the end of The Hitcher to me. It's like he appears somewhere else along the road to terrorize somebody else another day. Like, that's what's terrifying about that character, because as you say, there is something supernatural about him. Yeah, no, he's like the scariest monster in movies next to the original Alien. I saw The Hitcher I'd never seen it before. I saw it for the first time in the theater at a rare 35mm print screening at the Egyptian, where Alien first premiered, after Rutger Hauer passed, unfortunately, a couple years ago. Yeah. And that's the only sort of audience sort of level of terror I've ever experienced that felt like when you see Alien in the theater. In fact, I've never heard people scream before outside of Alien, but there's the the panning shot in The Hitcher where they're in the motel room and the boy goes to take a shower and he leaves Jennifer Jason Leigh in bed. And the camera slowly pans across the hotel room into the shadows, and a car headlight goes past and reveals Rutger Hauer just standing there. People screamed. I wonder if the director, who didn't really go on to do anything on that level again, unfortunately, I wonder if he was inspired by Alien. It wouldn't surprise me. Because they're very comparable in a lot of ways.
No, I think so. And talking about the sexuality as well in Alien, one of the things I also think is overlooked in terms of the dressing of the creature, the special effects that goes into the creature in the suit, there's one. I do agree that the alien is presented as being, as I mentioned earlier, the biggest dick in the room. It essentially is the alpha male that succeeds all other alpha males, everybody else withers in its presence. However, I do feel like there is a Ridley Scott talks about in the commentary as well, like when you see the alien suit in its full lighting, it's like, yes, it's got the giant dripping semen penis head, but it also has a vagina as well. I know that the shape of its head is used as more of a way to incite fear as well, so there is something certainly to read into there about the way that it presents this version of horrifying masculinity in a terrifying way. But like
it's not just horrifying mask, it's just the horror of sexuality and the horror of flesh, and the horror of reproduction in general, especially when contrasted with against, well, it doesn't look like high technology, especially now, but in this highly technological environment, that's the only sort of quote unquote esoteric reading I would I will willfully indulge in Alien. There was a documentary about the film that came out the other year called
is it Memory?
Yeah, Memory: The Origins of Alien. And Ridley Scott has always been happy to discuss Alien. He will participate in interviews. He's happy to talk about the movie in documentaries or in any context. This is like the only time I've heard where he pointedly said, no, I'm not participating in this. and you watch the movie and you quickly see why. There is a ridiculously tangential, very pretentious opening with the Furies, the myth of the Fury. It's trying really hard to tie this into the Furies.
I read that, and that's what actually put me off seeing it. I still haven't seen it, but I read in every review that I read for it, because I was quite looking forward to it at one point. It seemed to have this completely new take on the series that, even from like just reading about it, felt really tenuous.
Tenuous is being generous. I could fully sympathize with poor Ridley, why he noped the fuck out of that. This is the kind of dumb academic analysis that Ridley Scott hates, and I fully support him in hating it. So there's one commentator going on about how the alien is representative of a fury, and you see a major curse in the form of the alien, who is very much a fury responding to an imbalance. And then there's these, I think a lot of feminist interpretations of horror media are kind of off balance and silly, and are sort of missing the point, which is the thing that makes Alien feminist, and it's definitely a feminist film, despite what Ridley Scott may say, is the fact that the gender of Ripley is beside the point. There are no gender roles in the film. Yeah. None whatsoever. That's what makes Alien feminist. But they got like the Funko Pop feminist commentators on there going, the alien is an accidental awakening of some repressed spirit. The Furies speak to the repressed feminine. An alien certainly represents the repressed feminine's retribution. The idea that Alien is addressing the guilt that a patriarchal society feels makes perfect sense to me, says one commentator.
Okay.
But then there's even dumber shit where a commentator is like, I think the derelict is a crescent moon. The derelict represents a crescent moon and ultimately a symbol of death. You see 3 crescents all throughout the story. He's referring to the moons that orbit the planet. Just shit like that. It's like the Room 237 of Alien documentaries, except that Room 237
it very much sounds like that.
And Room 237, like, I know drives people crazy because they think that documentary is like earnestly arguing these theories when in fact it's not. It's not about that. It's about like, look at all the crazy shit people read into this.
Yeah, I really liked that film for that reason.
Alien and The Shining are like on very similar wavelengths in that respect. That because they are so stripped back, you can read whatever you want into them in a way. Although I do think that The Shining is definitely about Stanley Kubrick was obviously not interested in Stephen King's alcoholic self-pity shit, which is really all there is in the original Stephen King novel. But I think the interpretations that it's about like the history of violence in America and the history of colonialism and the history of patriarch. I don't want to use, I hate using that word because it's so overused today. But I do think there is a clear argument to be made that that's what The Shining is really about. I mean, there's big giant American flags hanging over when the kid is stumbling in with his neck, attacked and everything. And the reincarnation aspect is not in King's novel. The whole history of the hotel being built on an Indian burial ground is not in King's novel. That's all Kubrick's invention.
Even I think like the jumper he's wearing, the Apollo 11 jumper, the whole idea of the next great mission is to colonize space. It's like the whole idea of white colonialism is throughout that entire film, definitely.
There's a lot of things in that film that it's never clearly articulated, but there's something going on under the surface there, which prompts people to read into it whatever they want, and that ultimately usually ends up saying more about them than it does about the film. And Alien is very similar in that way, I think. David Fincher's take on the series, this is not something that I've seen people really discuss or whatever, because I guess it's buried in an old magazine, but David Fincher, after the release of Alien 3, gave an interview about his interpretation of the films. He says, "I saw the first film as the beginning of the yuppie ideal. It was getting ahead in the office, sticking to the protocol and being vocal and eventually triumphing through one's own beliefs. Obviously, it's more than that. It's a monster movie and it's 10 Little Indians, but I saw that film as being a real kind of personal empowerment. They gave it a feminist message as well. In 1978, you have the beginning of the whole me decade, and then by the time of the second film in 1986, you had a lot of women coming to grips with wanting a career and also having these incredible maternal instincts, and I think Aliens really taps into that. And when we started this one, referring to Alien 3, I thought, what could I do with the story that would ride the next yuppie wave? And I thought, what are yuppies coming to grips with? Sacrifice, the idea that sacrifice was a noble capitalist alternative. We've come full circle and realized that selflessness is as important as selfishness in order to survive." Oh wow, I've never even thought of the film in that way before with that framing. Alien or Alien 3? Alien 3, most certainly. I do know that there's a whole capitalist subtext to Alien and the way that it, like the Alien series in general as well, in terms of the way it presents the company as it's always referred to. But yeah, I've never known that. Like, I understand it's definitely about sacrifice, but against that particular framing. Yeah, I think in a way the third one is sort of the most hopeful film in the series. We had this conversation over Twitter once, in which I was responding to Alien Covenant, and it was in a direct message or something like that, and I mentioned about how I felt that Alien Covenant was the most nihilistic since Alien 3, and you responded that actually Alien 3 is really quite hopeful. And ever since, I've been viewing that film with that mindset of like to look at it with a hopeful perspective, and I do feel like there is certainly something there in the sacrifice that is made, that in the face of all of this, that the right decisions would be made in the end. Yeah, I think Alien 3 is a very, well, just aside from the fact of it being a very underrated film, I think it's an extraordinary science fiction film. But in the context of, the original Alien is a perfect movie because it's so stripped back. Yeah. There's no fat on the movie. It is what it is. It's so lean that it becomes existential, and in that is perfect. Whereas Aliens and Alien 3, they because they are sequels, and they are expanding on a story that was so stripped down to begin with, they have to go bigger. They have to become more baroque. And they go in very different directions. And I think Alien 3 is the more complex and interesting approach to that as a follow-up to the original film. I think it's a very moving film. It's commonly, described as, being nihilistic, but it's not. It's despairing at times. and it's very downbeat, but it takes the that thematic through line of the series that, you know, we are nothing in the face of the alien and the cosmos. And then sort of comparable to another movie that came out around the same time, also with religious themes, called The Rapture, which came out in 1990 or 1991, which is about a woman who is really unhappy and lonely in her life. She becomes a born-again Christian and gets, you know, hot David Duchovny as her husband, and she has a really happy family life and everything, and she's really happy when she's found God. But then a disgruntled gunman in the workplace shoots her husband dead after he fires him. And then her life starts to fall apart. She starts to lose faith in God, but she doesn't stop believing in him, which is what makes it really interesting.
Yeah.
A lesser film would be like, oh, she loses faith and becomes an atheist. No. In the universe of this film, God is very much real. And then it turns into kind of a religious horror movie where the rapture, as spelled out by I don't know which denomination of Christianity exactly it is, Baptists, whatever. I know it's a lot of the crazy American ones believe that the rapture is a thing that's actually going to happen. It happens. At the end of the film, she gets raptured up to the gates of heaven, but she's not being let in because she no longer loves God because of all the terrible things he's allowed to happen to her in her life.
Yeah.
Her dead daughter appears to her and says, just accept God back into your heart, Mommy. Just let him back into your heart and you can come be with me and Daddy forever. She's standing there at the gate on the River Styx outside of heaven, and she just says, no, I'm not going to do that. And her daughter says, well, do you know how long you're going to have to stay here? And she just looks off into the distance. She says, forever. And then the camera slowly pans back, and that's the end of the movie.
Oh, wow.
And that's a really powerful ending.
Yeah.
Alien 3 is very similar. It has that kind of an ending where not just Sigourney Weaver's Ripley, but, you know, the prisoners on this planet too.
Definitely.
You know, they die, but they do it on their own terms. And you can sell out, you know, Ripley is offered to sell out, you know, herself, her principles, and, you know, ultimately humanity if she wants to. She just has to, you know, accept, you know, the company and what they want, and she can have whatever she wants. And she says no. The prisoners on the planet who are there atoning for their past sins, even with this temptation of Ripley in their midst, that's another through line of the film, is that Alien 3 continues the sexual themes of the first film and the second film, is that these prisoners are all rejecting that. They're rejecting their sexuality. Yeah. This thing that has ruined their lives, because most of them are rapists. They at one point try and rape Ripley. Mm-hmm. They're saying, no, I'm not going to let this define me. I'm not going to let this be who I am. That's sort of what the alien represents, not just in that film, which it especially does. The alien in that film represents, you know, and especially because Alien 3 came out in the midst of the AIDS crisis, that gives it a new dimension too. It becomes an AIDS allegory.
I like that even in that film, there's two real, I mean, there are plenty defining moments, but for the two sets of characters, one we have Ripley and number two, we have the remainder of the populace of the planet. We have these two defining moments that come down to the point where there is a clear path of survival for these people. Like with these prisoners, it's they have this moment where they're all gathered together on this giant apparatus, and they're like, we're not going anywhere. We're going to stay here as a group where we're much less likely to be attacked, and wait for help to come, which, by the sake of probability, many of them would most probably survive that. However, it's a conscious decision that they make, that they cannot allow this to happen. It's like they listen to the woman of the group. They repress, as you say, that sexual urge that has ruined so many of their lives, to listen to and understand what this woman is telling them is going to happen, regardless of whether or not they wait. If they survive right now, it's just prolonging the terrible things that are going to happen. And they make that conscious decision, as you say, to die on their own terms. They know that when they get into this battle, it's the end of the journey for them. And I like as well that you have that moment where Ripley is faced with the same choice, and she makes the same decision as well, that, you know, it's better for this sacrifice to be made than for potentially so much worse to happen. And with that mindset of the hopefulness as well, as you say, I like how it's left for the worst people in humanity to make the right decision when it matters. And that is a far more hopeful message than I think we've ever had in this series as well up until this point. I mean, I guess Aliens is full of like hopeful moments for Ripley and Newton, that type of thing, but I guess it feels more prominent in Alien 3 because of how downbeat and oppressively depressing it is at times as well, in terms of the world that it presents, that even at the shit end of the universe, these people still make the right choice.
It's a very empathetic movie, and it's a very, quote unquote, it's a very woke movie.
Yeah. Even
compared to, the kinds of things that are very self-consciously trying to do that today. It takes people who are ordinarily, just written off as shitty villains or whatever, and makes them three-dimensional people.
Yeah.
And even like some of the cast, Charles S. Dutton was a former convict for murder, I think.
I mean, he's bringing so much to that role as well, that baggage that comes with it. When I was a kid, Charles S. Dutton was the thing that I remember first watching it, and I was just completely engrossed by his performance. Even as a kid, when I first watched it, I remember thinking, that is an actor that I now love. And it's like, it was always somebody that I looked for in films and looked for his films at that point as well.
No, he's amazing in that movie. He's a great actor, and he obviously brings a lot to it, because I did just check, and he pleaded guilty to manslaughter in 1967 and was in prison for 5 years. Oh, well, he was out on parole after 18 or 20 months, but he really was someone who went to prison for murder. It's interesting the way a lot of people will say, I hate that movie. How am I supposed to empathize with anyone in it? Blah, blah, blah. It's all a bunch of murders. Well, that's the point. You're supposed to try. You're supposed to make the effort, because these people are still people.
I've also, on a completely aesthetic level, speaking about the cast, a lot of people have said that because of the shaved head look of the film, which to me is incredibly distinctive, a lot of people have said that, it leads to you don't know who's who, and I've never gotten that from that film whatsoever. And I've always thought, I don't know if it's because I'm English and there's a lot of prominent English actors here, even like in lesser roles like Phil Davis.
Exactly. It's like, watch more movies. Do you not know who Pete Postlethwaite is? Do you know, these are all great actors.
It's never struck me, that idea that these people are interchangeable. I love that world that's presented in this film.
And especially to me, I think it is I love Aliens. Aliens is a great movie, but I think Alien 3 is the more, in terms of fidelity to the original, it's the more direct sequel.
Yes.
I think Sigourney Weaver is amazing in it. I think it's her best performance. But, Walter Hill and David Giler, who are the ones who ended up writing the shooting script for Alien, they wrote Alien 3. It has a very similar sensibility to the original Alien in terms of its politics, especially its dialogue. Alien 3 has great dialogue.
It does. I mean, you've got the chatter, but there's some standout just like moments for characters to really, like for actors to really deliver something.
Yeah, it's a great cast. It's, again, comparable to the first Alien in a lot of ways, I think. Sigourney Weaver, Charles Dance, Charles S. Dutton, especially as the headliners, those are great performances. Mm-hmm. Whereas Aliens has a fun cast, but I don't think it's a cast of great actors.
Yeah, I agree on that front, but I said this on the last episode, and it plays into that as well. I think Ripley, even though she is written to be a much more quote unquote, like a much more obvious quote unquote character kind of thing, it's like, this is our character's journey, this is her arc, she fits more the type of movie they're making. It feels more of a movie. I do feel like she's the thing that anchors the film, and everybody else has, apart from maybe Hicks, he's the one that feels far more grounded, but everybody else feels like they've been taken straight from the pages of a comic book to me. Exactly. And I don't know if that's because Aliens influenced comic books since then, but there is something cartoonish about them and about the way that they're presented.
Well, they literally almost did become a cartoon series. So, whereas with Alien 3, that movie was not merchandised.
Nope.
By the Prisoners of Fury 161 set, reenact the gang rape scene.
Oh my gosh! Yeah, you get the nice little bit of set, the fence, as well. I mean, I could talk about that film all day, but even the likes of Paul McGann as Golic.
Oh yeah, he's good.
I know his accent changes.
Yeah, but then I noticed something. I noticed in my recent rewatches of Alien is that Alien actually begins the changing accent thing that plagues the Alien movies. Veronica Cartwright switches a bit between a Southern accent and a... I guess that was the original Ridley Scott accent switching sin, where he couldn't decide if he wanted... Like when she's doing the countdown and she's got her cowboy boots, so maybe Lambert is supposed to be like a Southerner or something, but when she's doing that countdown, she's like 5, 4, 3.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, it always strikes me there. Yeah. And I guess really just bring into a head on really what I think Alien encompasses in terms of its themes. I guess the whole thing really is, and in its most obvious sense, and this is not going to surprise anybody, and it's going to be particularly on the nose. It's about birth, it's about sex, and it's about death. Or I guess it's about sex, it's about birth, it's about death. But it opens essentially with birth. And one of the things that I like about how it presents birth in this film is that the first image that we get of it is that the Nostromo crew waking from their pods. And it's this whole idea that they live in an environment that is where technology is taken over what our bodily functions essentially are there to do. It's like these characters are born into bright light with these wonderful little womb pods that open up kind of thing, and they gently come to life and into the world again. And then you contrast that with the way that the alien's born, and it's just like that punching reminder of, you know, birth is this horrifying, gory thing. And
well, you're the parent.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I will say, as somebody that has been there during a traumatic birth, it is a horrifying experience. You are totally out of control. It's far gorier than anybody lets you into, and things can go wrong at the drop of a hat. And for many people, unfortunately, it does. I mean, not to go down this road, but for many people, unfortunately, it does mean death, and that is terrifying to me. And I remember after we did have a second child, but after our first child, I was like, never again. Obviously never again. We're never going through that. And I feel like now Alien has certainly tapped into that aspect of my brain and managed to root itself there, because I can't help but see that film in that light now with that frame of context. But what I like as well is that we have all of these parental figures all the way through the film. I did read one aspect of the film that presented it as being about parental abandonment, and the idea of, obviously, we have Mother, who's the ship's computer that bursts this crew. And we have Ash, really, as the father figure of this duo. He's the medical officer who's also an android. He's supposed to look after this crew. And they essentially abandon them. They find a new toy, some other organism to rear to life, you know, crew expendable. I read this wonderful essay about it being about this sense of complete abandonment, but also with this technological edge.
That's actually something I've never thought about. That sounds like something that would be in that memory, The Origins of Alien thing, but I like it. It does fit. It actually fits. It's not a reach. Like, it's all clearly there. You can pull it out of the text if you want to. No, that's interesting. For me, the whole thing with Mother and, Ash and everything is that Alien, again, being a product of the 70s, it's sort of a boilerplate commentary to make, but it's a post-Watergate movie. And it has elements of the 70s political thriller in it, which is not there in the original Dan O'Bannon draft. That's all added by Walter Hill and David Giler. And
Definitely,
of course, David Giler wrote one of the drafts of The Parallax View, which is one of the premier, that's Alan J. Pakula.
Yeah, the Warren Beatty film.
One of the most famous political thrillers of the political conspiracy thrillers of the 70s, recently reissued by Criterion.
I was going to say, I've seen it being discussed in a few different places all of a sudden recently.
Yeah, so Alien neatly slots into that too. That's the political element that Walter Hill and David Giler add, which, again, Ridley Scott doesn't care about, but it's there. They added it. Which is Alien on another level can be read about the failure of all the systems we put in place to protect us, or how many of those institutions that are supposedly there to protect us are actually a lie, and they're actually against us. There's, of course, the company that employs the crew, which considers them expendable. They're just assets to be used. that phrase, the company, is a 70s slang term for the CIA.
And then that plays into the whole weapons division thing as well. It's like...
Yeah, that's one of the subtle detours into political conspiracy horror. Why does this corporation have a weapons division? If it's a mining company. That's part of the really, really great world building of the film, is that there's clearly an entirely thoroughly realized world existing outside of this frame, outside of this story. But Walter Hill and David Gower and Ridley Scott do not expound upon it for you. It is there. You get the sense of it, but you don't get any details about it.
Yeah.
And that would happen again in Blade Runner, which we'll discuss in that episode. But you already get a sense of this dystopian future where political authority, government authority has been eroded and superseded by capitalist corporatocracy, or whatever I guess you would want to call it, which, is exactly where we are now, pretty much. Even though, again, Ridley Scott, in interviews for Alien Covenant, someone brought that up. He said, no, don't ever read that into my movies. You need evil corporations because they're the innovators or whatever. It's like, okay, Ridley, calm down. He went through this weird phase in 2017 where he was like saying stuff like that, and also saying, well, the Republican tax plan is good, actually, if you think about it from the perspective of blah, blah, blah. But he came to his senses eventually the other year. That's, again, one of the interesting things about Ridley Scott's filmography is his politics, or, how much they influence the final product or not. Because you get the sense that he's very much one of those socially liberal, fiscal conservative people.
Yeah.
Those two things are very at odds with each other, so they sort of end up canceling each other out a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's one of the things I hate to hear from people. And I remember reading it in an interview with Damian Lewis, and I've read it in an interview of people of that certain class as well, that they often describe themselves as being, oh, well, we're quite socially liberal, but we always vote Tory. And it's
yeah.
That doesn't match up. Just saying that you're socially liberal, you accept the gays in public, it's not an excuse for who you vote for and the reprehensible things that they do.
Alien is the first film where he got sort of slapped with the feminist label, which he doesn't like to apply to the film, but he's happy to apply to himself.
Yeah.
He sort of took that on as part of his brand, and it eventually led him down the very dark, specious path of something like G.I. Jane, which we will eventually get to.
Where we get the feminist moment of Demi Moore asking somebody else to suck her dick.
Yeah, that film is very much the unironic forerunner of something like the famous Twitter joke, liberals will be like, hire more female prison guards, instead of, stop putting people in prison, stuff like that. More female drone operators. That literally is that movie.
I mean, for me personally, Alien is, as we've said, it is a feminist movie. Again, I think it's quote-unquote woke in a way that I wish more films were more progressive in this way. Because
it doesn't think about it.
No, exactly. It's natural. It's just, this is the way it's made. Turning progressiveness into a marketing tool is also as bad as not using it at all, because you're turning it into something that you can merchandise. Exactly.
I think that's very crass, and I think it's very insincere. That's one of the reasons Alien has aged so well too. So there's none of that. There's none of that posturing. It just is. And even Yaphet Kotto, his presence in it. He's the only person of color in the film, but he's such a powerful, dominant presence. Yeah. And nothing is made of, nothing is made of his race. Mm-hmm. He's second to Ripley. He's the most heroic character in the film. He doesn't die first. He's the next to last to die out of the entire crew.
He makes a true sacrifice as well.
Yeah, no, he's a really heroic character. I think his death scene is probably the most frightening scene in the film, next to the Dallas and the air vents, with when Parker and Lambert get killed. That's a masterpiece of cross-cutting by Terry Rawlings, that whole sequence. The score by Goldsmith in that scene is really frightening. And those flash cuts to Veronica Cartwright's terrified face as the alien is bearing down on Yaphet Kotto.
It's another one of those scenes where they give you just enough information to know what's going on, but not enough that you can figure it out.
And you never even see what ultimately happens to Veronica Cartwright. Again, that masterstroke, that complete masterstroke of Sigourney Weaver running down the corridors with the broadcast audio of Veronica Cartwright being murdered.
Yeah.
And it sounds horrific, and it sounds like she's being raped.
Yes.
And then, of course, Sigourney Weaver turns the corner and Veronica Cartwright is now naked, and all you see is like her leg dangling from the ceiling.
and her broken big toe.
Yeah.
That's part of the reason why, for me, like the alien, I've always identified with it as being a masculine presence, is that it's a penetrator, essentially. And we see in that scene as well, like the way that the imagery sets it up of what it's going to do to Lambert and how it's going to do it. I think in that moment, that's why I've always identified it being as this like horrifying masculine alpha male presence in this film, even though there's more going on to it than that. But I think that scene just always solidifies it in my brain that's what it is to me. Viewing
it though, in the context of the other movies, and interesting enough, even in like the context of Ridley Scott's prequel movies, is that the alien in this does not feel, let alone look, because it looks the best in the original movie.
It does, yeah.
It literally is a piece of fine art, handmade by H.R. Giger himself. But the feel of it, the presentation of it, the way it behaves is completely different, where in all the other ones it's more like an animal. But in this one, part of the reason the film remains so effectively frightening is because it seems actively malevolent and conscious of its own evil. And it seems legitimate. It's not an animal. It seems like a legitimately evil presence.
It's enjoying what it's doing. Like the way its arms move as it approaches Lambert as well. Like it's playing, its fingers are like dancing in the air kind of thing, and its arms are moving like it's taunting her.
Yeah, like it rounds about and like viciously attacks Parker, but then when it turns back on her, it's slow
and it takes its time. Yeah. What happened to the elegance of this creature? What happened to these moments? And as you say, these moments of malevolence. When did it just become the insect or the animal or that type of thing? I wish we brought that back again.
Maybe Ridley Scott, if he ever makes the third prequel, he'll bring that element back. I know a lot of people in Covenant cited the alien as the weakest link in it for them, which I initially thought too, but I appreciate that aspect more on rewatches.
I think I'm coming round to that aspect more and more with every watch, definitely.
It is still very much an animal in its adult form as presented in that film, but that one is the only other film this year that has like it's not when the alien is an adult, but it's when it's the chest bursting scene in that film. But we'll talk about that when we get to that film.
Definitely, yeah.
But that's the only scene where something very interesting is done with the creature after the first, in terms of its behavior, the way it's presented on a contextual level, since I think the original. Yeah,
I am looking forward to that episode. I've already done one up on Popcorn Digest about it, but I'm looking forward to revisiting and going through that again, because there's so much to say on that front as well. And I feel like there's stuff that I never really got a chance to talk about, that even now in a post-pandemic world, that the way that it presents the alien threat as being one that is... it's a microorganism, essentially. It's a virus, and one that is inhaled, is come to have far more meaning and impact now as well, in a way that nobody anticipated. And I also think as well, like, it plays into something that I wouldn't say it's not a plot hole, because I don't like that. I'm not Cinema Sins. With Alien, I do know that one of the things that people have said is, well, why are the face huggers seemingly made to fit human heads?
Exactly. Why do they have human fingers for digits?
Exactly, yeah. That seems to play into that in a way that I didn't expect, but one that I am totally on board for. Okay, so one more thing that I did want to just discuss as well in regards to Alien, that I don't think we've really gotten into over these 2 episodes until now, and that is really... Well, we have talked about some of the things that they've done on a practical level that has meant that this film has lasted the test of time. But also, I can't understate how much the miniature work and the set dressing and that type of thing has an impact on this film and has meant that it's lasted. The fact that these ships feel real they feel like something I can visit. And I do know that they're made, like, they're cobbled together from existing shop kits. I know that you can find R2-D2's legs in the Nostromo docking claw.
Yeah.
The Nostromo feels real to me, and it's all because it's practical. It's all because it's in camera.
Yeah, and it literally is made of actual flying machine parts. They deconstructed old DC bombers and warplanes and commercial jetliners and spent months tearing them apart and then organizing all the torn apart pieces on shelves. And then they literally turned that into the interior sets. So you are literally looking at something that really did, in part, used to fly.
Yeah.
And it just, there's a visceral reality to the sets. He doesn't really do this anymore, which is a shame. But I think I used this phrase in the Duelist episode, and I'll use it again here, and I'll definitely be using it in Blade Runner and Legend, but the visual density. Every shot is jam-packed with information. Ridley Scott's whole approach in his early career is every shot, every frame must be packed with as much information as possible.
With as much film.
Exactly. With as much... The detail of the sets must be exacting and complete, and then we're going to overlay it with smoke, and then we're going to put just every single little... You just don't get that anymore.
And nobody uses smoke like he does as well. Like, all of his sets they just have that sense of atmosphere to them.
Yeah, that's what makes it feel real, is just the incredible, overwhelming physical attention to detail. The film has an intensely physical, palpable presence. He lingers on it. He doesn't cut away quickly. That's another thing. The film has not just his early style, but this was something you could do in the 70s that you can't do anymore, but it has a very stately Kubrickian style to it in terms of its cinematography, the way it's shot, until the terrifying, rip-roaring, pure cinema handheld third act where the camera is just running around literally on a shoulder. There are shots in this film that last an entire minute long, where the camera just prowls and follows a character or moves about the ship. Like the whole opening sequence, there are no humans appearing until 5 or 6 minutes into the film. Yeah. Maybe even longer.
And that's all great work as well, because you're getting to know the ship as the character before you get to know the people. And that really lets you know what you're in for as well with this film.
And on these rewatches for it, I've just really been appreciating the way Scott lets his camera linger, the way shots breathe. Like, you can think, watching it now, and when he eventually released his quote-unquote director's cut in 2003, which is nothing of the sort. Director's cut implies, this is his definitive version of the film. No, what it actually was is just a marketing gimmick to get people to go back to see the film in theaters. And in fact, it should have been just called a director's recut or something. It
still surprises me that he didn't fix that ash head shot as well. Of all the things to do, just do that one thing and release it.
Of all the things to fix an Alien, it's that, and maybe optically blur the faces of your kids in the spacesuits a bit, because they are very noticeable. And John Hurt's stunt double going down the ladder. Those things I always notice them, and they always take me out a little bit. Those are the only things worth fixing in Alien. In fact, when he made that director's cut, he did exactly what would have been done contemporaneously in 2003 when it was made, or especially now. He cut the breathing moments where characters are thinking. There's moments between the action where nothing is said, the character's just thinking, like the really beautiful moment where Dallas is inputting into the computer, what are my chances, does not compute. He just sits there and thinks for a little while as the camera slowly pans back. Those beautiful pensive moments, those get cut out. Those would not exist in a studio film today. And
no.
I think my favorite one in the film that I realized in these rewatches is after the Nostromo is detonated and Ripley is in the pod. In a modern film, the bit after that explosion where she says, "I got you, you son of a bitch," that would be the cut, and then the scene would advance from there. But no, that little bit keeps going. And Ripley just sits in the chair, and then in this beautiful, beautiful shot, Scott just slowly pans down as in this side profile shot of Sigourney Weaver, as she's just sitting there thinking, She's just sitting there thinking about what she's been through. What is there to do
just
now?
A moment of processing. She's collating.
Yeah. It's just this long 30-second take of her just sitting there, and it's beautiful, and it's very moving, and it sort of recalibrates you, and it sets you into the rhythms of this last set piece. If that film was made today, gone. They would not have that. Stuff like that is what, again, continues to set this film apart. It's just a really mature, cerebral, intelligent, very stately and elegant. It's a very spare and elegant film. They do not make them like that anymore, unfortunately, including Ridley Scott. Like, I think Covenant really does try and harken back to that in places. And the pace of Covenant is very 70s. Yeah. There are scenes that are allowed to breathe. There are moments and things, which I think is another reason like audiences sort of turned against that film. Yeah. But that is part of Alien's legacy, and that is part of why it endures. Just no science fiction, no horror film had ever been made with that kind of sensibility before, or really since.
I think it's sad that we've got to a place as well where filmmakers no longer have the trust in audiences to really take this on board and to accept these type of films, where it's long silences and you have these moments where films are allowed to breathe. All of that has gone to the wayside. Every film has to open now with a big action scene to bed the audiences in. I think audiences, there is the potential there as well for them to be accepting of this type of film, but they've been conditioned for so long against this type of film that it's no wonder that something like Alien Covenant didn't land. And that is, even when you place it alongside Alien, it certainly does feel like more of a 70s film, but it's more of a love letter to that. It still has a lot of modern kind of twists and structures and things going on that level. Like I always think one thing that takes me out is the way that when you compare it to Alien, you have that long opening sequence in which titles play over that vast empty space. And in Alien Covenant, they don't even allow the Alien titles to play out in full over the one scene. It has to start over a shot of David and then move into the scene. I wish that even that film had just a touch more breathing space. And I feel like we can get to that place again. It's just, you've got to allow audiences the time to, you're going to have to deprogram them almost out of the type of films that we are now spoon-fed to us day after day after day. I feel like, you've got to take us back a bit.
Well, maybe someday. I don't necessarily think that would happen, but if Ridley gets to make his third one, that may very well end up being his last film. And I'm sure, even though in interviews, he seems to be in stringent denial of his own mortality. Yeah. But he must know that there is going to be a stopping point, and he must certainly consider, what does he want his final legacy to be in terms of the final films he makes.
The Monopoly movie.
That'll definitely be an interesting place to see where he ends.
I think so. And I think his films have taken on some of his films, the films that feel very much a part of Ridley Scott's worldview. And I mean, films like Alien Covenant seem to be about him dabbling with the idea of God as well. And they always have. But I feel like now it has a little bit more poignancy as well.
That's an entirely other thing that we didn't think to delve into. There's a lot of religious interpretations of Alien or whatever, which I'm sure Scott would shut down. Because that's another interesting thing to bring up about Ridley Scott, is that he is very much an atheist, or at least an agnostic in the sense of a spiritual God. He's sort of in his later years, he's sort of pivoted into ancient aliens conspiracies, but in terms of a spiritual deity or whatever, Ridley Scott does not believe in that, and he is an atheist, and that is something that informs his films and his worldview, which we will, of course, get into later when we get to stuff like Kingdom of Heaven.
Of course, absolutely. Okay, so I think that brings us to a natural close on our Alien double bill. And if you join us next week, we'll be dreaming of Electric Sheep as we're discussing the daddy of all director's cuts. That's right, we're taking on Blade Runner. But until then, it's bye from us, and thank you for listening.